Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger from the Schiller Institute. Welcome to our webcast this week featuring our founder and president, Helga Zepp-LaRouche. Since our program last week, Helga has drafted a memo which is being circulated widely in government circles to institutions at the United Nations, at events and forums, and it's something which needs to be circulated everywhere. It's titled, Follow the Example of Singapore. And I think this really shapes what we want to start with today, because what Helga described is the process that was unleashed leading into the meeting between President Trump and North Korea's President Kim Jong-un. So Helga, why don't we start with the memo that you drafted?
Well, it is sort of obvious that if President Trump and President Kim Jong-un are able to completely transform a very dangerous situation around North Korea within a few months into the total opposite, from the danger of being at the trigger point of World War III to the absolute hopeful perspective that North Korea can be integrated into the Belt and Road Initiative with the support of the United States, China, and also Russia. By basically promising security guarantees, lifting eventually the sanctions, denuclearize completely, integrating North Korea with the Belt and Road Initiative, making it a prosperous country. I mean, these were really groundbreaking developments. And as President Trump had said in his press conference, the past does not determine the future. Now, that is obviously the proof that you can turn the worst situation around if you have an inspiration, a vision, and the political will to do so. And given the fact that we have right now a complete destabilization of the West, in Europe, for example, the refugee crisis is threatening to completely rip apart the so-called European unity, which is non-existent. It could end the chancellorship of Merkel within less than 2 weeks. And obviously, the border crisis between the United States and Mexico also shows that the immigrant question is out of control and needs to be addressed. Now, obviously, what is being proposed by the European Union and by different factions of the German government, all of these proposals are completely unworkable. They are brutal. They are barbaric. Both the idea to create camps in outside of the borders of the European Union in North African countries to basically catch the refugees and deter them from coming to Europe. I mean, this is barbaric. I mean, all these people who were so freaked out about Trump ripping the babies from the breasts of their mother, these are the same people in the same media who have no problem in proposing camps in countries which have no clear government control. And there are many reports that people in these camps were put into slavery, sold, raped, tortured, absolutely terrible conditions. And naturally, if you don't address the real root cause of why people are coming to Europe, namely that the conditions in Africa are not yet in any shape to have people live there, or at least in many parts, then obviously this is a completely unworkable solution. So I have made the proposal in this memorandum to follow the example of Singapore, that the EU should change the agenda in their upcoming summit, which will take place in less than a week, and put only one issue on the agenda, the real development of Africa. Invite President Xi Jinping, because he has an enormous credibility in Africa for having invested in railways, in industrial parks, in hydropower, in many, many projects, and invite some of the African heads of state which have already achieved great results by cooperating with China in these projects. Now, if you had the European leaders, Xi Jinping, half a dozen of African leaders who would speak for the continent, and they would declare a crash program for the infrastructure development of Africa. Not only would it have credibility because of Xi Jinping's presence, but it would send a signal to all these governments and to all the young people that there will be a great opportunity to cooperate in the construction of their own country, so that they would not feel compelled to travel through the Sahara and die of thirst, or drown in the Mediterranean, or be captured by Frontex police to be put in something which even the Pope has characterized as concentration camps. So I think this could be done. Now, it's not so likely that the EU will do this, given the fact that they are what they are. But, this is a absolute correct idea. And if this EU summit misses this opportunity, then one can have a summit at any time in July, in August, or one can even, take the UN General Assembly in September to make that issue the only point on the agenda. Now, obviously, the same applies for the United States. They should have a summit with Xi Jinping, with leaders of Latin America, and there do the same thing. Have joint ventures between the United States, China, and Latin American countries to transform the continent and eliminate the poverty, which is the reason why people are now flooding into the United States. Now, I think that approach is eminently feasible, and it is the only way how you solve the problem. So, I'm very happy that, this call has found a good response. It's being translated. It has been translated into 8 languages already, including the most important European languages, Chinese, Russian, Japanese, Korean. And I would ask all of you who are watching this program, help us to circulate this call. And also another one, which was issued by Keisha Rogers, the Texas congressional candidate, who obviously focuses especially on the American aspect of it. So help us to circulate these calls and get on board of this mobilization, because it is extremely urgent that this approach is being taken.
I think the most important thing is that what you've proposed breaks the controlled debate. The reason that we're in this mess is that the debate has been a phony one. Do you let the borders be open and let nations be overrun, or do you clamp down the borders? And they're missing, as you say, the generating process, which has been the wars and the poverty. Now, one of the things that's interesting in the last week or last few weeks since the Singapore summit is that one of the things that Trump has been moving toward is going ahead with this summit with President Putin of Russia, which again breaks the controlled environment. Do you think this would add to this, and would you give Trump the advice in meeting with Putin that he should take up your proposal?
Well, I think that, the meeting between Putin and Trump is obviously the next important item on the strategic agenda. And I think the fact that, you have now active preparations for it, the meeting could possibly take in July, possibly in Vienna, is also the result of the fact that, the Russia gate has fallen apart. And as the Inspector General Horowitz said in the hearing in the Senate, that this was only on the email scandal around Hillary Clinton, that there was absolute unprecedented bias on all of these people, and that Trump was completely justified in firing Comey. So I think this has somehow freed Trump to move forward on this front. But I think let me raise another issue, because there are obviously very bad escalations around this trade war, and the tariffs which have been imposed. I mean, Trump altogether raised the possibility of putting tariffs on 450 billion imports from China, and there are now countermeasures going into effect. Tomorrow, the EU will put in countermeasures. Already, such countries as Turkey, Canada, and Mexico are also putting up tariffs, and there is the big danger of an escalating trade war. Now, all the media from Russia, China, the Chinese were very indignant by saying, that this is completely counterproductive. This is a lose-lose policy. There are many people who voted for Trump, farmers, industrialists, who are now hit by the effects of these tariffs and are in danger of going bankrupt. This is no good. And what we have proposed, and what I have proposed with the Singapore approach, would be obviously a solution to this problem. Because if the United States and China would engage in joint ventures to develop Central America, Latin America, South America, the trade volume could be increased so significantly in a multilateral way that the trade balance could be overcome by increasing the trade. And I think that I would like to get this message out in particular to the voters of Trump who are affected by these policies, the farmers, people who are, have cross investments in part in China, in part in the United States, who are, in danger of going bankrupt, and that a lot of jobs are in danger as well. I would like to ask them to pick up this proposal, the Singapore solution proposal, and get it to Trump, because I think, there are some ideologues in the Trump camp who are also anti-China and who are, extreme neoliberal free traders. And I think they're giving him advice which is really turning potentially his base away from him. So if Trump could, continue to have his excellent relation with Xi Jinping, add to that an excellent relation to Putin, and then, go in the direction what he has proven he can do already in Singapore with North Korea, he could do the same approach. Naturally, the issues, the predicates are different, but the approach would be the same, that you turn a bad policy, a lose-lose policy, into the opposite, and you go on a win-win cooperation. And I think that the world is urgently at need of such a policy change. And I think it can be done. The fact that the Singapore summit took place is the proof that you can completely change a policy when it is leading nowhere. And I think the West right now is really faced with this decision in general to either change policy or collapse, and that is what is at stake. So I would appeal to the Trump supporters to pick up on this proposal and help us to turn this around.
On this matter of being able to change the relations from the past to a completely new relationship, we've seen that starting to take place between India and China with the Modi meeting with Xi Jinping. And there's some significant developments that just took place between Japan and China.
Yeah, this is very good because China and Japan had also very deep historical, distrust and for the war, for the record of history. Japan was obviously not writing the history in the right way, but this is all now past. And starting last June, or actually last May, when Prime Minister Abe sent the number 2 of the country, the head of the Liberal Party, Nikai, to the Belt and Road Forum. And then from June on last year, there was a clear cooperation. But just 3 days ago, Japan and China signed an agreement that they will together invest in infrastructure projects in third countries. So if two countries which were really not in a friendly mode can agree on this higher level of reason of joint mutual interest for also third countries, I think this is a model for every country in the world. And I would just wish that the Europeans would look at Japan, because, you know, if they can do it, they should be able to do it as well.
Well, and speaking of unfriendly nations getting together, look at the potential now between South Korea and North Korea. I want to come back to this Europe question and the refugee question, because it's so central with the EU summit coming up. There are a couple of aspects to it. One is the refugee crisis seems to have hastened the confrontation, which is taking place inside Germany, and I'd like you to talk about that. But also, people shouldn't lose sight of the fact that this is not just a refugee crisis. The economic crisis continues. There are some really silly proposals or dangerous proposals being put forward by Macron and Merkel to increase the power of the Brussels banking bureaucracy. So the EU summit is coming up, Helga, and the two aspects of it are, what do you think will happen at the summit? And then what are the chances that Merkel survives?
Well, the mood in Germany, and we get this from all kinds of sides, is that Merkel should really go, and it's time, that her chancellorship ends. She has been there too long already. So there is a mood in the country, and obviously the relationship between Seehofer and Merkel has been poisoned for a very long time. And there are polls, that if the steps are like this, Seehofer, the head of the CSU and interior minister, who threatened to unilaterally impose border controls on the German border, which naturally would mean that the whole Schengen agreement would be, waste paper, and with that, the basis for the currency union, the euro. So Merkel, basically met with Macron and basically, insisted that she wants to have a European solution to the problem and not a German national solution. Now, even the mainstream media are mocking that the chances that Merkel will get a European solution are really extremely slim, given the fact that there are more than 8 countries who absolutely refuse to take any refugees, who refuse to take a quota. And naturally, the Zeit noted that the irony of the matter is that in this coming EU summit, Merkel will need especially the support of Greece and Italy, because these are the 2 countries which are hit with the most refugees. And these are also the countries where Merkel is the most unpopular, given the fact that she and Schäuble treated these countries so absolutely brutally in the so-called Euro crisis. So the mood against Merkel in Greece and Italy is really big. So it's very difficult to say. It may be that Merkel will sell whatever result she gets as a European solution. In all likelihood, it will be some kind of bilateral deals. And naturally, with this horrible idea, what I mentioned earlier, the camps outside of the EU, which is barbaric. And if there is no agreement, the possibility still is that by the end of the 2-week ultimatum, Seehofer will impose unilaterally border controls in his capacity as Minister of the Interior, in which case this would be a insubordination towards the office of the Chancellor. And if Merkel capitulates to that, her power is gone. And if she does not, she only has the chance to kick out Seehofer, who then could take with him the entire CSU out of the coalition. And there are already polls that, the CSU would get 18% if they would expand to become a national party. Now, this is all absolutely unworkable, because no matter what combination you make, they could take the Greens into the government or the FDP. But if they keep the policy, it's just a prolongation of the crisis, and it will not solve anything. So I think that what has to occur is there has to be a reflection of the fact that the West is clearly crumbling. I mean, there are even articles in all kinds of papers, and one article I find quite noteworthy was in the Austrian paper, Der Standard, which is a liberal paper, but nevertheless, they basically said that the West missed its chance completely, that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States was the only superpower, but then they gambled it all away by having these absolutely barbaric wars in the Middle East, which caused the refugee crisis, which caused all of these problems. And now they are basically, they are lost. And there's a very nice story, which I'm tempted to tell you. It's called The Man and the Wife in the Sour Bottle. I don't know, Essigkrug, I don't know the word in English right now. Anyway, it's about a man and a woman who are living in a old, horrible house. And then a little bird comes and they can wish something. And they say, oh, we want a nice big farmhouse with lots of acres. So they get it. Then, they are not satisfied with that. They say, we want a big villa in the city. So they get that. Oh, that's not enough. We want to have a big castle and we want to be king. Oh, that's not enough. We want to be emperor. They get all of this. And then they say, oh, that's not enough. We want to be God. And then all of this vanishes and they're back in their old little house. So the moral of the story is that the West had the chance by the end of the Soviet Union to really change the world for the better, but because of their limitless greed and their limitless power-seeking activities, they messed it all up. And I think I just find this a nice little fable, a little story. But I think more fundamentally, the West should really reflect, what has been going wrong with the neoliberal, left liberal, neocon geopolitical model. And why is it that the Asian model is so much more attractive to many countries and is so much more concerned with the common good of the people? And that is why China is rising. This is why the Belt and Road Initiative is absolutely the biggest infrastructure project in history. And, I think that we must find some thoughtful people in the West who are willing to enter a debate, a discourse, and what is necessary to correct the present policies. I think there has been much too little thinking about, what is going on. And if people just insist to keep the status quo of the neoliberal establishment, the West will crash against the wall. And I think, given the fact that the Singapore model exists, I would like to encourage all of our listeners to engage with us, to become a member of the Schiller Institute, participate in our activities, and strengthen such an international debate, because it is extremely, necessary, it's urgent, but it's also very hopeful because, changes are already happening in a positive direction.
Well, speaking of changes, the fact that the Standard did what they did, even though they're 3 decades behind you, Helga, but it's good that they made that, had that comment. Now, also coming up at the EU summit, there's the whole question of what will be brought in by the new Italian government, Austria. The two of them have been pointing toward getting rid of the sanctions with Russia and also openness toward China. Do you think they'll have much of a voice at the EU summit?
Well, I think the Italians clearly have learned from what happened to Greece, because when the Tsipras government was voted in, they went to Brussels and tried to, really revolutionize the whole process. They got smashed. They got smashed by a combination of the EU, the European governments, the European Central Bank. And I think the Italians probably will play it more carefully. So, I would not think that there will be a similar process like with Greece. But on the other side, I think Italy is not Greece. Italy is the third largest economy in Europe. And, I think there's also, all these other governments who want a different direction, like Spain, Portugal, the Balkan countries, the East European and Central European countries, Austria, Switzerland. They are all on a different trajectory. So I don't think that the policies of Macron and Merkel to go for a Eurozone budget will find any majority. I mean, already Söder, the new head of the Bavarian government, said that he absolutely rejects this idea. It just means to pay more, to have another budget, which Germany obviously would have to pay a large part. So I think this idea of to impose now more European integration at a point, when all these governments really question the merit of having been in this Maastricht process at all, I think this will not happen. That's my modest prediction.
Well, let's hope some of them will take up your proposal on the Singapore model. I want to get back to one other thing you brought up earlier, which is the idea that President Trump has been somewhat freed by the breakdown of the Mueller investigation. We're seeing Mueller, of course, still moving desperately, the jailing of Manafort, revoking his bail, moving against Roger Stone, claiming that he was the WikiLeaks Russia connection. But at the same time, there's the Horowitz report. There's more coming out in the Congress. How much longer do you think this dual situation can continue with the arguments of collusion, obstruction, when all the arguments are falling apart?
Well, I think there are signs that some congressmen are still moving aggressively forward. So next week, Peter Strzok, or Strzok, whatever you call him, he will be forced to, testify in the Congress. And, I think that these people could face criminal charges fairly soon. Naturally, unless this really is taking place and the whole situation is corrected, the danger remains very high. So I think it's not yet at all time to relax and be certain that things are going in the right direction. I mean, the Democrats, the same Democrats and the same mainstream media who have been absolutely silent when Obama and before Bush, but especially during the Obama period, was conducting these so-called humanitarian wars, condoning the worst kinds of atrocities. They were yelling and screaming against Trump because of this border question with the children. So the hypocrisy of these people is big. Now, they had called for a national demonstration this coming Sunday, given the fact that Trump has now made a decree that these families should stay together with their children. The border police question that all of these children really belong to these adults because, this is a long-standing thing. It happened already 4 years ago with Obama that, the human traffickers had figured out that, you could send lots of children and they did. And at that time, Obama slammed down as well. So I think this whole situation really needs a grand design because, if you have a messy situation, which you have, sometimes you have to reach a completely different level. And the different level is exactly what Trump did in Singapore. And the fact that he did that once, saying things which were quite incredibly good, namely that the past does not determine the future and that things can be changed. I think he needs to have that kind of an approach towards this whole situation. I mean, obviously, the Mueller-gate should come to the point where the responsible people are accounted for what they have done, also legally. And I think the bigger picture even is the grand design. I think Trump has to really move away from this trade war and move towards the cooperation with Latin America, with China, with Russia for that matter, and be an integral part in development projects in Africa, in Asia, in South America. And if he would do that, I think the world could be in safe waters in a very short period of time. And since it is within reach, I can only repeat my appeal to you: help us and move with us, because this is the time you can influence history, which you cannot do when everything goes in quiet lanes and quiet roads. But this is turmoil. This is a change of the whole world. And it's these moments in history where you can intervene if you have the courage and you have love for civilization and you have a vision what to do. So join with us and help us to turn the situation around.
And I would urge all our viewers to go to the newparadigm.schillerinstitute.com website and get a copy of Helga's statement on the example of Singapore. Circulate it, create a ruckus around it. Let's get that debate going. So Helga, thank you very much for joining us this week, and we'll be back next week.
Yes, till next week.